Metro Council's Education Committee. Councilman Glover to my right is the chair of the Education Committee, and I am the chair of the Budget Committee. I sort of remind everybody that the inclement weather of a week ago caused us to reschedule this meeting, and we are indeed in a very large room because we are being televised on Channel 3. Otherwise, we would perhaps be in a more intimate setting, but we did think that this information and this discussion so important that it ought to be televised. We're in a formal setting, but we won't necessarily be quite so formal, even though because of television we'll use our microphones. We are joined today by Will Pinkston, who is the chair of the Board of Education's Budget Committee, and Dr. Register and Chris Henson, who are obviously regulars here. For our purposes today, I will sort of turn the agenda over to Chairman Pinkston, both for introductions of all of his colleagues who are here, and we thank you all so much for being here, as well as to take us through their overview, which is on the handout before each one of us that are here, and then as we get towards the end of that, obviously we have time for questions and discussion. This is a follow-up to their invitation, the Board of Education's invitation to us back several months ago at the Martin Center, where they originally outlined their thought process of where they were at the beginning of their budget process, and this is an update on that discussion, and we are delighted to have these ongoing conversations as we head to the nitty-gritty of the next few months as we actually have something hard before us all. With that, Chairman Pinkston, thank you, and the microphone is yours. And gentlemen, both microphones, there's one over there. There is one, both of those will work. You just have to pass it at a certain point. Will?
Thank you, Chairman Stein, and Chairman Glover, thanks for having us over here today to continue the discussions that we started last fall around the MNPS fiscal 2014-15 operating budget. Before I go further, I would like to introduce and acknowledge the presence of my colleagues you have with you tonight, a majority of the Board of Public Education. We are led, of course, by our chair, Cheryl Mays, as well as our vice chair, Anna Shepard. Joining them to my right, to the viewer's left, is also Dr. Joanne Brannon, Elisa Kim, and Jill Spearing. We are very pleased to be here with you this evening. As Chairman Stein said, my name is Will Pinkston. I'm the chair of the Metro Nashville Public Schools Board of Education Budget and Finance Committee. To recap where we are in this process, we began budget planning a little earlier this year for the subsequent year than we normally do. There were some things that we saw on the horizon that we wanted to go ahead and get a handle on sooner rather than later. We also brought that information to the Metro Council in October at the Martin Professional Development Center, which is one of our premier MNPS professional education facilities. We had a meeting with the Council Budget and Finance Committee and the Education Committee to discuss the projections that as we knew them at that time. You have, council members, in your packets several pages. The second page is the starting point for that previous discussion, which included a projected $38 million increase over the current operating year. That number, I'm pleased to tell you tonight, is going down. We do not yet have the final projection yet. Mr. Henson and his team are working on a few moving parts, which we'll discuss here tonight, but by the time we get toward the end of the month, we'll have a lower number that we're working with, and what we'd really like to do tonight is talk to you about those moving parts, these what we call substantive new developments. I'll click through them verbally, and then as we get into the discussion part of the agenda, we can unpack them in greater detail. But there really are four substantive new developments that are impacting the budget. The first one, and you have subsequent sheets in your packets that go into greater detail on this. The first one is we are seeing slower or lower than expected enrollment growth in our charter schools, which means that the cash outlays to fund new schools and growth in existing schools is going to be less in the 2014-15 year than what we had originally projected. That was based on projections that the operators gave to us. We'll talk more detail about what's moving those numbers. The second substantive new development that we want to talk with you about tonight is Dr. Register's very bold plan to expand early childhood education in Davidson County by adding new pre-K seats in strategic locations and facilities around the city. The third moving part, substantive new development that we want to tell you about is Governor Haslam has proposed a teacher pay increase. Mr. Henson will go into greater detail about that, but when there is a state proposed teacher pay increase, there is a local match that goes along with that, and we'll give you the detail and take questions there. And then finally, lastly, as you may know, MNPS established an early retirement incentive program to our certificated, actually our entire workforce, not just certificated, but all employees who have 30 or more years of experience. We're very pleased with the results of that program. The deadline closed on Friday, February 28th, and Mr. Henson has the details and can tell us where we are in that regard. So that's what we had in terms of our agenda tonight to bring to you, and of course happy to take questions at the appropriate times. And I'll now turn it over to Dr. Register and Mr. Henson to go deeper.
Good afternoon. Thank you for meeting with us this afternoon. We've been looking forward to sharing our early budget considerations with you. I'm going to turn it over to Chris and let Chris walk you through the overview and then be available for specific discussion on individual topics. So Chris, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Dr. Register, and good afternoon. Just to touch a little bit more on some of the information that you have included in your packet, referencing that first page behind the agenda page, just to touch on it, as I had promised you back in October, these numbers have changed, and so what I wanted to do is just point out a few of the things that we know have changed since we were together in October, and obviously with draft in all caps in each of the four corners. I intended this to be a starting point. You can see this was actually put together back in September at the bottom of the page. But when we look at the compensation items, a number of those are related to benefits, and so we now have a much clearer picture as it relates to both projected insurance costs as well as projected pension costs. Those will be incorporated into the budget proposal that's shared with the Board of Education's Budget and Finance Committee on the 18th, March 18th. So we do know what those numbers are, and they have actually decreased somewhat from what we were originally projecting, which was based on the fiscal year 13-14 data. And as Mr. Pinkston already mentioned, and we'll touch a little bit more into detail on this, in the middle part of the page you have an increase as it relates to the increase in charter school students. That has decreased as far as the original estimate. Now once we've gone through the student selection process, we have a better handle on what we are estimating as far as total number of charter students. So there has been a fairly significant decrease in that number. And so, as Mr. Pinkston mentioned, at the bottom of the page, this is where we were starting with the $38 million increase. And as Mr. Pinkston said, we're planning and anticipating when the budget is proposed to the Board of Education that number will be lower. We don't know what the final number yet will be, but we do anticipate it being lower. I'm not going to spend any more time on that document since, again, it is old data, and I promised you that it would change. The second sheet back, or actually the third sheet, the second one after the agenda, represents a side-by-side comparison of the number of estimated charter school students back when we were together in October, and it was based upon August data. And then after we've gone through some of our selection process, et cetera, what that new number is, you can see it's a reduction in the number of charter school students, fairly significant reduction, and based upon an estimated per pupil cost of $9,200, we're looking at about an $8 million reduction just for the charter outlay from what was discussed with you back in October. And then if you turn the page, we have a more detailed, this is more of a broad view of what we're looking at as far as pre-K and pre-K expansion as it relates to our proposal to have model pre-K centers. And we do have Dr. Register and other folks more than willing to discuss this with you. You can see at the bottom of the page the proposed expansion, the additional operating cost right now we're estimating at around $3 million. That would be included in our budget proposal that would be submitted to the Board of Education. And we can get into more details as it relates to pre-K. In a nutshell, we're looking at increasing the number of pre-K students just with these three centers, model centers, by 340 seats. Then on the last, I guess the next to the last page, there is a one-pager relating to the governor's proposed teacher pay raise. I'm not going to read it to you. We've estimated, based upon our teacher salary schedule, which is higher than the state minimum salary schedule for teachers, if we were to give the equivalent of a 2% state teacher raise, that would be an average of a 1.43% raise on our teacher salary schedule with a cost of $5,362,000. We will receive additional revenue through the state's BEP funding formula for this raise, where the 2% salary increase is applied to the instructional personnel salary unit cost in the funding formula. And so we're estimating that would generate additional BEP revenue from the state of about $2.8 million. So the net effect would be, between increased expenditures and increased revenue, would be about $2.5 million would be our estimated local match requirement as it relates to providing this state teacher raise. A lot of times, as I've said in the past, a lot of times when people hear state teacher raise, they assume that's all state funded, and that would not be correct. It does flow through the state's BEP funding formula, and there is a local required match. And then on the last page, we've got a lot of information here, and we can go into more detail if you would like, but I'll just reiterate what Mr. Pinkston said. We're very happy and pleased with the results of our retirement incentive. We actually had more individuals participate than we had assumed and estimated. Our assumptions were based upon the last time this retirement incentive was proposed back in 2004, 10 years ago. And so we actually had a higher percentage of eligible participants actually participate in the retirement incentive program, which of course is an outlay, a one-time outlay for the retirement incentive payout, which the council did approve from the school district's reserve, fund balance reserve. You did approve that back in December. And then we also estimate that we will have annual savings, which is really the intent of offering a retirement incentive, somewhere now in probably the $3 million amount is what we're looking at as far as an estimated annual savings of about $3 million. That would be the difference between the salaries of the retiring employees and the average salary of new hires. And so we're very pleased that that has gone as successfully as it's gone. So just a little more detail as it relates to what's included in your packet. Obviously, we'll be happy to discuss anything else that you would like to discuss, but we wanted to at least share this. We consider these things substantive new developments since we had last met back in October.
Let me just add one point on the teacher pay raise or governor's proposed raise. That's 2% is the governor's recommendation, 1.43% for us on the teacher salary schedule. That bottom line does not include steps for years experience, nor does it include cost of living or longevity pay for support employees, and we'll anticipate a recommendation to the Board of Education that would include cost of living increase for support employees. Typically what we've done in the school system is tried to mirror what we've done for teachers with the support employees raise, and we haven't really dealt with the issue of step increases yet, but we're prepared to make a recommendation to the board about that. That will cause that dollar figure to go up. May I just open it up for questions or let you take it where you'd like to take it, or if there are specific issues that you'd like us to elaborate on, I'd be glad to do that.
You can let me, we're behind you, so you don't have to turn and look at us.
Okay.
It's probably dangerous to have Steve Glover and I sitting behind you, I understand that. To help us, because council is used to thinking about this process really in terms of May, when the mayor's budget comes before us, and obviously we are talking about some of these issues earlier. Could one of you all outline for us exactly where you are in the Board of Education's budget process and what your sort of timetables are to approve a budget recommendation that then goes to the mayor?
Yes, Chairman Stein, we've got a busy month ahead of us. I'll just talk about dates here on the calendar. On March 18th, the board's Budget and Finance Committee, which is a committee of the whole, so it's the entire board, we will meet for a uniquely focused discussion on the budget at that point, so a little over a week from now. By that time, Mr. Ensign and his team will have produced the revised summary sheet based on all of these moving parts that we're kind of fact-checking at the moment, if you will, to make sure the numbers are all accurate and adding up. On 2 weeks after that, on April 1, the Budget and Finance Committee will return to continue discussions and hopefully approve the proposal at that point in time. If we see the need to have additional steps built into the process, we'll do that in consultation with the board chair. And then on April 8th, presumably, the full board, which again is the committee is a committee of the whole, so we will have already discussed it pretty extensively by the time we get to April 8th. We'll approve a proposal to be transmitted to the mayor, and then I believe our budget hearing with the mayor is scheduled on April 16th. So we've got several steps in this process moving forward.
Thank you. Chairman Glover?
If we could, let's go ahead and kind of shift the talk a little bit about some of the conversation we had back in October, some of the conversation that we've had with regards to steps that you're moving with regards to classroom, traditionals, charters. Let me say, if I may, to my council members here, I attended, I think it was week before last, maybe it was 3 weeks ago now, a meeting where they actually had all of the proposed new charter school folks come in, and I thought had a very good conversation to really look at, where's the potential growth going to be, what's that going to look like, and what's it going to mean. I know that we had asked some, what kind of changes are you making with the traditional classrooms? Can you just talk a little bit about that, and then we'll turn it over to council members for any specific questions that you have. Specifically, I know at Donaldson Middle School, you can talk about Cambridge now. Let's talk about some of the things that are going on to really, up the bar for all the student population.
Well, we've adopted a strategic plan. We were a year involved in that process, and we have a new 5-year strategic plan now for our school system that's got a number of improvements listed. I think the priorities this year for us that we're really looking at are pre-K expansion, the technology plan associated with implementation of Common Core and differentiated instruction that goes along with that, and those two are the main ones that have a real impact on what we're doing. We're looking at a new literacy program that we're implementing, a K-12 literacy program that's not included in this, but the board's seen preliminary presentation on what our new K-12 literacy plan looks like. So a number of substantive increases. Looking at middle schools particularly, we're really focused on middle schools this year and trying to improve the engagement of all middle school students. And program-wise, we've got a specific recommendation to upgrade involvement in related arts at the middle school level to really positively involve children there. associated with Common Core curriculum is our All-Star Training Program, and that's a program to reach every teacher in our school system and to provide a program that gets them technologically competent with the equipment to differentiate instruction in classrooms, and that's a huge effort. And I want to say that through the approval of the fund balance, use of fund balance with Metro Council, we've done two things related to that. One is to start the process for purchasing a large number of student-used computers. Those are actually ordered now, thanks to you. We'll be bringing them on and putting them in schools now. And having children learn how to use those and having teachers learn how to use those to differentiate instruction in classrooms. That's about 8,000, if you will, student-used computers on movable carts so that they can be moved in a classroom of a lab full of computers at the time into classrooms so that students don't have to use their classrooms. I'll give you a little preview of tomorrow night's school board meeting. We're actually going to have a sample of the technology to show the school board tomorrow night because it is coming in now. We're very pleased with that. We're very pleased with the training program that we've developed for our teachers. We think it's the best in the country, state of the art for using technology, for having teachers meet competence and show how that technology will be used to differentiate instruction in classrooms. That training program is in progress now, and what accompanies that is putting a laptop in each teacher's hands so that they have the equipment necessary to be able to implement that in their classrooms also. Have a lot of other things going on, Councilman, but that's a start anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me ask two questions, and then colleagues, if you all want to just press buttons at your respective colleagues' desks, and I will call you. To follow up on Dr. Register's, your comments about compensation and steps, some of that, Mr. Henson, you at least made some estimates in those October numbers, correct? So I was just sort of curious, as Dr. Register was mentioning, it may sound a little bit gloomier than it really is because you've already at least estimated some of that, haven't you not?
Correct. If you look on the second page on that document that we discussed back in October, I did include the estimated cost for a salary step increase for both our certificated employees as well as our support employees, but did not, and pointed this out at that time, did not include any estimate for an across-the-board raise. And so we didn't know what might be proposed at that time. So again, what we were looking at on the compensation piece were strictly estimates. There was a step increase included in that number, but no across-the-board raise.
Okay. Will?
Thank you, Chairman Stein. Just to circle back around to Chairman Glover's question, which is I'm summarizing here, what are we doing to drive wide-scale improvement? I would only add to what Dr. Register said, in addition to all the elements that are contemplated in the strategic plan, the board is putting in place new mechanisms that are designed to help set the bar high for management. And we do have a high bar. We have some aggressive academic improvement policies or goals in place set between now and 2017 and 2018. Chairwoman Mays also has appointed Ms. Spearing to chair our new Teaching and Learning Committee, which is really designed to take a look at some key levers of change within the system, including but not limited to how are we as a board monitoring and promoting recruitment and retention of highly effective teachers? What are we as a board doing to promote and encourage really high-quality professional development for our teaching corps, and then also leadership development. There are a number of things in place, but the board is monitoring all of that closely and is going to continue to do that. And I would say just one thing about Dr. Register and his team. A little-known fact over the last couple of years is our HR office has been transformed. And it's been a team effort, including Mr. Ott, Ms. Thompson, and their teams. It has really moved from what historically in a school system is kind of a resume intake operation, and it is now, it's not completely there yet, but it is now a talent recruitment operation, and we as a board need to do a better job resourcing it and supporting Dr. Register and the team and moving it forward, but that's something that we're really proud of across the district and something that doesn't get talked about a lot.
Councilman Dominy.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple points I wanted to discuss. The first one is you indicated a reduction in charter school enrollment. Can you give any indication as to why that has taken place, and then what impact would that have on our budgetary process? And is it something you think would continue, or is it just a fluke? What's behind that?
I'll take the first crack. If you look at the sheet, which is the third sheet in the packet, which it estimates charter school enrollment growth, in the far right-hand side of the page, in those two columns, you have the estimated number of students who were expected to be in charter schools for the 2014-15 operating year. We made those estimates in August based on information that was provided to us by the charter operators. Over time, that information has been refined, and now the number that was 6,765 seats is now down to a projected 5,890 seats, so it's a reduction of about a little less than 900 seats. And again, this is based on the enrollment projections and estimates that they provide to us. So as those numbers have changed, we've changed the projections accordingly. If you look line by line at the list, what you see there's 23 schools. Of those 23 schools, 15 are now projecting slower than expected enrollment growth. I think it's important to note that enrollment's not going down, it's just not going as fast as they hoped it would be.
Okay. Any indication as to why that might be?
One school made a decision not to open this year. That had originally been approved to open this year, and I think growth in a couple of those have been slowed. But other than that, we don't have a good feel for that. I think one thing we can say, it was an early estimate based on what each of the charter applicants proposed, and their staffing's not, and their student enrollment's just not living up to that early projection and what their maxes could have been.
Okay. Well, the good news budgetarily is that it's $8 million less than what we anticipated. I just was curious as to what might have been caused that, what the budgetary impact would be. The teacher's pay raise you indicated from the state, and I know it's customary, and I've been involved with this for some time, that when we raise our teachers' pay, we also raise our support staff. The groups that are within our support staff, I'm curious how the pay raise will be impacted by those that were privatized when they privatized the custodians, as well as those that would be support staff that are not part of that privatization, and how that's going to impact the budget.
At this time, I can't really respond to that. I don't know what GCA is planning to do. That's the largest private provider of our custodial services, so we have not had a conversation with them. Chris, have you?
I have not.
Okay.
The other thing is the BEP funding formula. As most folks here will know, that Davidson County is woefully underfunded when compared to other counties surrounding us. In particular, Williamson County, being one of the wealthiest counties in the country, receives more BEP funding formula per student. Can y'all share how much funding they receive through the BEP funding formula?
I didn't bring that list with me, but we'll be happy to share that. We do have that. We have for every school district across the state, and we can share that with you.
And for us, what we receive, we can get both of those so we can compare the two, and I'd love to have the surrounding counties just to see what it is. It's long been my opinion, several others, that we need to change the BEP funding formula, and I would hope our efforts would be lobbying the state to do that, because we are injured. In fact, I sat on a committee that was discussing that back in the early 2000s at the state legislature. I think Mr. Glover was there with me in another lifetime. I asked if they were not jumping out of the small schools lawsuit into the large schools lawsuit when they changed the BEP funding formula and dramatically and negatively impacted the municipalities across the state of Tennessee, the larger ones.
Thank you for your comments, Councilman. I would just add that Davidson County is shorted in the BEP, in the basic education program. We have the fourth lowest share in the state in terms of the percentage of state funding that goes into our per pupil funding. We fund in Davidson County 2/3 of education, public education locally. That looks dramatically different in many school districts across the state. We are involved with what's called the Coalition of Large School Systems, which includes our colleagues in Shelby County, Knox County, and Hamilton County, about having a more, let's say, structured conversation with the state about BEP funding before going into potential litigation. So we're trying to have those conversations and hope that they'll be responsive.
Well, if I may be of assistance at the state legislature, I do have a few friends and probably a few more enemies, but I'd be glad to assist there in that process where it involves the state.
Thank you.
And you may have to, Councilman, if the legislature outlaws our local boards of education from advocating, you may be the last person left to advocate up there. Councilman Davis.
Last man standing.
May I just add one word to that? Because we're talking about equity when we're talking about BEP formula, but I think the other factor to consider is the issue of adequacy and what we're expected to do. I'll call them unfunded mandates, but I don't want to go down one particular path. Let me give you an example of one that's not very well known, but we're putting in our budget now, in this year's budget, 25 additional English learner teachers. That comes at a cost, and when you look at the part, and we have roughly 30% of the English learners in the state of Tennessee, and that's not adequately addressed in the BEP funding formula. Issues like that can have a big impact on local budget and just not be recognized if we don't call attention to them. But we still have to fund those programs.
Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Budget Chairman Pinkston, for fighting for us on that one and working with the state. I just had a quick question about where we are on the overall number. Are we at 38 over now, or that was before? And, have we added, of all the differences in this packet, the $8 million from the charters and then the teacher raise, has that already kind of been added in, or where are we on the overall number?
We're still working with that. The 38 was best estimate at that point in time back in September, October timeframe. There are, of course, a budget of this size, there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of additions, a lot of deductions as well. And we'll be sharing that with the Board of Education on the 18th when we unveil the proposed budget in detail to them. So we don't have a final number as of yet. We're still working through everything, making sure we've got everything in there, and we'll have something for the board on the 18th.
Okay. And then I wanted to ask about pre-K. Very exciting to see the growth in pre-K. Maybe just get a few more of your thoughts on that. I see you had said we're going up 340 seats. Looks like about $5 million. What's our ultimate goal on pre-K? And we've heard a lot in the news. I think some of the state people have even said pre-K doesn't work, which I'm a believer in pre-K. I think it's kind of common sense. So, very excited about that program, and just love to get your thoughts on where you're going with that. Obviously, you've got some short-term goals here, and then kind of long-term.
Let me give you some numbers that I think can set the context. In kindergarten, we have approximately 8,500 students. At the kindergarten level, approximately 75% of our children are on free and reduced price lunch. A large percentage of our English learners are there. So that's a starting point. At the pre-K level, at the 4-year-old level, we serve now 2,500 students. Difference between 8,500 and 25 is significant. Let's add into that where Head Start is in Davidson County. That's another 1,400, between 1,400 and 1,500 students. So, and then we have private providers, and some of those private providers are very good, and our goal is to partner with them. The goal is to serve ultimately all students who need and whose parents want a quality 4-year-old program, and that's what we're building to. We want to partner with Head Start. We want to partner with private providers, but also expect quality and high quality. And our goal is to establish 3 model programs that are best practice in the country. We have a lot of partners that have signed on to this already. What we've done as a first step is to repurpose 2 elementary schools, Ross and Bordeaux, and to plan to some capital expenditures that are not significant, they're not included in these figures, but to expand there and to grow the program that are served in those 2 model centers and a 3rd model center that we're proposing that the board will act on tomorrow night, from 200 students to 540 students, and to go to full-day programs in those schools. We're very excited about where we are with this. There are 3 people in the back of the room who are intimately involved in this planning. I'll ask them to stand up to introduce them, if nothing else. Brenda Steele, Phyllis Phillips, and Lisa Wiltshire are taking the point on planning this program for us and can answer all those questions that I can't answer for you. That's what I wanted to do. But we're very excited about this program. We're proposing a partnership with Connexion Americas tomorrow night to give us an inroad into South Nashville. It's not as far south as we need to go, and in the future we know that we have many unserved children in that area, and we need to push on into the southern part, but to expand opportunities from what we have now.
Councilman, I would just add on early childhood education, on pre-K, the issue of quality is something that the board, I think, is going to be watching very carefully. There is research out there from Vanderbilt and others that does demonstrate efficacy when it's done well. And so our job is to make sure that it is done well, and I have every confidence that Dr. Register and his team are going to pull that off. I think, 2 things that we don't get to talk about enough around this particular issue is in the process of repurposing Bordeaux and Ross elementary schools to make them model pre-K centers, we are in effect closing 2 low-performing schools. So we get a lot of pushback from critics of the school system. Well, you just should, fund what works and shut down what doesn't. So we are reassigning those students to higher performing schools. We are in the process closing lower performing schools, and we are using those resources to deliver what we think really does add value in North and East Nashville. And then, as Dr. Register said, in South Nashville, the proposed partnership at Connexion Americas and Casa Atzafran, if stepping back at this for a minute and looking at it in this way, we have 8% of the English language learners in the state of Tennessee. We have 8% of the total public school students in the state of Tennessee, 8 or 9%. We've got 29% of the English language learners. We have, of those English language learners in our system, more than half of them are in grades K through 3. And so if you accept the fact that you have an outsized proportion in those lower elementary grades, then we come to no other conclusion but pre-K can be part of giving our youngest new Americans a running start and do better when they get into the early grades.
What we've seen on the best and latest research on the effects or the value of pre-K is a tremendous return on investment, if we want to talk about investment, and a return of $7 to $8 for each dollar invested. When studies are more sophisticated, and when you look now at the current research, the research is becoming much clearer that it's really a good thing to do. And actually, what we've involved on who we've involved on our steering committee. 2 people are Professor Dale Farron from Vanderbilt and also Professor Mark Lipsky from Vanderbilt, who are nationally recognized experts in the field of early childhood research. We have other partners that we're bringing to the table, and I think this is my top priority. This is the thing I think that can make a tremendous difference in Davidson County for the education of our young people and the quality education and the success of our young people as we move forward.
Yeah, just makes sense. Catch them while they're young. And, it sounds like you have, one other comment I wanted to make was something we've talked about at League of Cities, and I feel like I'm having the same conversation with MDHA and other groups, is just kind of more on the outer rings, like it sounds like you want to get down to Antioch and Southeast and that area, you're going to South Nashville. I think, Ross and Bordeaux are great places to be, obviously, but, we've just got lower incomes on kind of the outer ring and sort of the trend in all these cities. Nashville, definitely it's happening with the urban core. Incomes are kind of flopping, and so, it's good that y'all have that on your site. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll say a word about that for the selection. Ross and Bordeaux are really good choices for a number of reasons. If you know where Bordeaux is, it's on 41 coming into town, and it can really be a place, a regional center to serve all of the northern part of Davidson County, and we're excited about that. And Ross is just a block off Gallatin Road and Main Street, that area, and can serve as a drop-off point for people coming in from that whole region. So we're pleased with that and look forward to further expansion as we go forward.
Councilwoman Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. Just to continue on the pre-K, how does transportation work for a 4-year-old? Do we put them on the buses?
This phone's telling me there's something wrong, and I can't answer. Pardon me. I think I pushed the button in my seat here. We do not provide transportation for 4-year-olds for our pre-K. Head Start does. It is specialized transportation on different types of buses. Our plan to start with is not to provide transportation, but to locate centers strategically so that parents can use those centers as drop-offs. One change that we're making that will be significant is that we are going to full-day programs rather than part-day programs, and we do plan to provide before and after daycare for parents in addition to the full-day pre-K program. So that'll make a big difference for parents.
Does that include nap time?
Yes, it does.
Good. That's important.
Nap time, snack time, play time, and other things.
And recess. That's good. That's good. Back to the charter schools. Are any of the new proposed charter schools conversions, and does that have a different financial impact than opening up a whole new school?
Thank you, Councilor Allen. We received on January 31st 9 letters of intent from prospective charter operators who indicated that they wanted to set up shop in Nashville beginning in the fall 2015 school year. Where we are in the process is this. Applications are due on April 1st. Dr. Coverstone, who leads the charter review process and who's in the audience, if you have detailed questions, Dr. Coverstone and I met with these prospective applicants. I'm the board's, in addition to the budget chair, I'm also the board's delegate to the charter review process. And we discussed with them their proposed concepts. We're still, of course, waiting to see what applications come in. But what we found is there are at least 2 operators who are interested in doing conversions of existing schools. As you all know, the board at a policy that we passed in November are really trying to think strategically about how we deploy charter capacity in the upcoming cycle, and really would like to invite and have invited conversion proposals, as well as proposals that could help us manage growth in areas of town where we would already be having to add capacities, which is primarily South Nashville. So we had 2 prospective operators express interest in conversion. One is KIP, and we, in fact, were told by them that our local conversation has really helped inform how their national organization is thinking about conversion. It's typically not something they've done in the past, but they are beginning to rethink that based on feedback that they've received from districts like us and a couple of other large ones. The other operator that's expressed an interest in conversion is Rocket Ship. We, as a matter of fact, Dr. Register, Mr. Henson, and Dr. Coverstone and I met last week just to talk about what, if any, incremental costs are associated with a conversion, and we're still running the numbers on that. It's not something we've done frequently, but it's happened before, so we'll be able to report back to you with some more detailed information.
Great. I have one more question. On the teacher retirement, in terms of, quote, recruiting and retaining high-quality teachers, how does having your most experienced teachers retire fit in with retaining high-quality teachers?
Well, we lose some good teachers with a retirement incentive. It is a budget process to try to reduce our overall costs. We also want to recruit high-performing new teachers to the profession here, and we feel like we can do that. But it's undeniable, there is a loss of some really good talent. One strategy that we'll use is to try to hire some of those back. The state of Tennessee has a 120-day policy, which is about, it's a pretty significant amount of time where we can hire teachers back who retire and pay them for 120 days and not be responsible for benefits and so forth. So we'll actively recruit a lot of those people to part-time or half-time jobs for us as we fill vacancies. And I think the pay raise is the other part of the equation, and what we're offering teachers here to really recruit as an incentive to keep teachers high-performing teachers coming in, and then to have them stay is very important. So. Overall salary, strategic compensation, something that we've been working on, and we're continuing to work on that to make sure that we have competitive salaries and that we're getting the best use of the funds that we do have available.
Okay, thank you.
Council Lady Allen, I would just add on the retirement incentive page in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a number which is, and Mr. Henson, correct me if I'm looking at the wrong number here, but the total value of the retirement incentive program is 5.28, a little bit less than 5.3 million. As Mr. Henson said earlier, the actual value is going to come in somewhere closer to $3 million because we will have to hire back into some of those positions. Some of those will be essential positions, so those positions don't necessarily just go away, but they will be filled with, some of them will be filled with younger employees who therefore do not cost as much.
Okay.
Did I get that right, Mr. Henson?
I'll just make a quick correction. The far right column is the total payout amount, and so what we're looking at is an estimated payout of amount of about $5.3 million for the incentive pay. What we're also looking at as it relates to annual cost savings is, as I mentioned earlier, the difference between the salaries of the retirees who are taking advantage of the incentive and the average salary of new hires based upon position. That's where we're looking at right now, an estimated $3 million annual savings amount. So you've got the far right column representing what the payout would be for the incentive payment. And then we're still calculating what the annual savings will be, but we're estimating it at this point around $3 million annually.
Councilman Glover.
I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit, and I don't want to drag this out, but Madam Chair, of course, as each of you know, we're going through a massive audit that the council approved and is being done of the school system. I know that each of you, I don't know if you've each met with them yet, but you're certainly going to be doing that. In doing so, once this audit comes out, how much do you feel like you'll utilize that? Because Mr. Pinkston, Chairman Pinkston, I know I heard you talk about closing some schools and doing some other things to talk about economics, and obviously we have finite resources that we're able to look at and do here. How much do you think you'll be able to utilize and this may be a very unfair question, and if it is, and you want to get an answer back, that's fine. How much do you think you'll be able to utilize the audit, if it's as extensive as I'm anticipating it being, in helping you with the board kind of draw the blueprint for how you're moving forward, schools that may need to be consolidated, closed, et cetera? Have you guys had any conversation about that?
No. What I will say is that I'm really hoping that it is as extensive as you think it will be, and it could be a very good tool for us going forward. But until we see that final audit, of course, we can't say. Right. So depending on what the findings are, I think, regardless, I think, as I said, it would be a very good tool to sort of lay the groundwork of where we need to go from this point forward. It was a very extensive process, and I think all board members have now gone through and spoken with the auditors, and I think that's fantastic. One thing I want to caution about, though, is we need to be very careful about saying that we're looking at closing schools, because there are no closures on the table at this point, and we need to be very careful about saying that. But at the same time, once we get that audit back and we start to look at our budget process, we've also got to understand that we've got to be smart about the choices we make. We've got to look at everything that's out there. And at this point, while there are no school closures that are being proposed, we can't definitely say that that won't happen in the future. But it all goes back to what our final budget numbers are going to be. So we'll wait to see what the audit finds, but I think it will be, as I said, a great tool for us to sort of lay the groundwork going forward.
Right.
Councilman Glover, I'm looking forward to seeing the results, and I know that we won't agree with everything, but I think we'll also get some good advice there. And one area of advice is how the Board of Education and the school system interacts with metro government. I think there's a lot to learn there. I will point out that this is a performance audit, so it's really not necessarily an audit just based on financials that gives us a way to save money. I think potentially there is that there, but hopefully what it'll do is guide us toward a better way to do business.
Excellent. Well, and again, I know it was an unfair question, and we don't know what will come back, but the nice thing that I've enjoyed hearing from the board is that you plan on using it extensively on how you kind of put some of your plans as you go forward. And I wasn't necessarily saying that go close a school, but what I was saying is, if it looks at that in the performance audit and it finds some glaring discrepancies or I guess eye-opening ideas, I hope that all of us will be open to what we may need to look at as we go forward.
Absolutely, and I think it's going to give us a really good opportunity to see where we can make some improvements or where we're really doing well, and I think we're doing well in a lot of cases, but I'm looking forward to getting the results back, so I think all the board members are, but thanks for asking that unfair question.
And Chairman Stein, I'd be remiss if I didn't again say that obviously the meeting got moved. There's not quite as many people who would have liked to have been here, but I certainly appreciate my colleagues who were here this afternoon.
Let me ask a couple of things before we break. Perhaps most appropriate first, I guess, to Mr. Henson. Is this the last budget that we will be institutionalizing in an operational way, race to the top dollars, or is this going to continue an ongoing process over the next several years?
No, this coming year will be the last year that Race to the Top dollars are available. And so we are planning for that through this budget process. We've been planning for it for the last couple of years. And so this coming year, 2014-15, will be the last year for Race to the Top funding.
And so it presents a real challenge for us in this regard in terms of expenditures. We have much less, we're finishing up the Race to the Top budget. The spending rate for last year was somewhere in the $5 to $6 million range, and it'll be between $1 and $1.5 million this year. So there's quite a bit of belt tightening that we have to do to react to that.
But also in your rough draft, which obviously is not valid for us anymore from a few months ago, there's clearly several $1 million of items that I think are things that you want to keep doing that we have to move to operations from that Race to the Top dollars, correct?
That's correct, and we're looking at all of our budgets combined to make those decisions, the local operating budget, the other federal budgets, and Race to the Top budget, and our goal all along has been to identify those high-yield strategies that we want to keep and we feel like are adding values, and then to abandon those that are not, or to make reductions in other areas where we see less return on investment.
Thank you. And then, Dr. Register, to build on a timely question based on your comments that perhaps the audit will give some hints as to how entities within the government ought to be working together. I would be remiss if I did not ask this question, and I need to preface it by saying we obviously up here have been dealing for the last couple of months now, it seems, with the notion of your reserve fund usage. And part of that rhetoric has been that indeed, because some of us, and again, the council's never taken a vote on this issue, so I don't presume to speak for the council, so I can only speak for myself. I, for one, the rhetoric about being anti-schools or anti-young people, because I believe the timing of that request, which this council has in general terms in its history, rarely spent reserve fund dollars at this point in the year with the budget process coming forward. That has been interpreted by some as perhaps we weren't supportive of what you all are about. That's absolutely not the case. And again, I can't speak for my colleagues, but I think almost all of them are very supportive of what you're doing. And I think this council in its history and its work has proven that we want to be full partners and are supportive of what you're doing. But so I guess my follow-up question, because we still have a pending resolution before us that deals with, I think, approximately $4 million of your reserve fund, which would go to the training and some of those things. At this point in our process, and I'll finish my long-winded prerequisite to the question, at this point in our process, and I know that there is no uniformity on your board, just as there's no uniformity in our group in terms of perspective on that issue, I assume that you all will have your own discussions about using your reserve fund. I assume, based on past history, that you all will then have discussions with the mayor about the use of those reserve funds, and then I think finally, when you all have your heads together, there'll be discussion with this body about using that reserve fund. At this point in time, is that a priority that you all would still advocate that we spend in the next month before we go through this whole process and find out your entire package? And I don't know who can respond to that, but you all are here, and I would be remiss, I think, because it's pending before the council, not to ask you all where you think you are at this point in time.
So I'll give the general answer and then ask Chris to be specific. Early on, the original request was what we thought was an appropriate use of fund balance, because we were talking about a lot of one-time expenditures. We're still staying with the plans. It's really not an option for us not to push ahead with these expenditures. And I mislabeled one comment earlier. It's really the supplemental capital expenditure that you appropriated to us that's allowed us to buy those student computers. And what we're doing in addition to that, we still have the same challenges, so we've really developed an alternative plan for funding that program, and we've moved ahead with that. We're lease purchasing computers for teachers pending board approval over a 3-year period of time. That's on the agenda for tomorrow night. So what it does is it spreads out the payment for those computers over 3 years, but it impacts our operating budget rather than our capital budget. And that's really been the basic approach, is to find the alternative to using fund balance for doing that out of this year's capital, next year's capital, this year's operating budget, and next year's operating budget. And I'll let Chris be more specific.
And that's exactly right. And as I've said in previous meetings here, we're planning to do what we said we had to do. You did approve the use of reserve funds, fund balance, for the retirement incentive, and we were very appreciative of that. And as I said earlier, we feel like that was very successful and is going to generate annual savings in our operating budget going forward. You also, as Dr. Register just mentioned, approved a supplemental capital allocation for the purchase of computing devices for student use. We have already begun that process, and we plan to have those computers out at schools for students to use. It only left a few other things. The main one, the largest one, being the training for the teachers, the staff development, which went along with the provision of a device for the teachers. And as Dr. Register mentioned, we are going to be leasing those pieces of equipment over a 3-year period and include that cost in our operating budget. looking at the current year operating budget, searching for any savings that we can find to be able to do that this year, to pay the first year out of this year's operating budget, and then moving forward for the next 2 years, including the lease payments for these machines. We also are looking at use of IT capital for the Kronos project, which is, as you probably know, a joint project with Metro Government, Metro ITS. We're also looking in other departments' operating budgets for some of the other things like the universal screener that we talked about. We are planning to pay the first year of that with Race to the Top funds and then include that in our operating budget for the next couple of years. So we've got plans in place to do what we said we were going to do. We're not going to do them exactly the way that we originally proposed when we were proposing the use of fund balance, but we're satisfied with this method and satisfied with moving forward, not using any more of our fund balance reserve.
Thank you.
At this point.
One last general question. Are you, knowing how conservative you are in the work you do, are you optimistic or pessimistic that you will find the savings?
I'm optimistic that we'll find the savings to do what we have to do out of this year's operating budget in conjunction with utilizing capital funds and the spreading out of the payments for the teacher laptops.
Thank you. Members of the council, additional questions? Mr. Pinkston, Dr. Register, a final word?
Dr. Register?
Thank you very much for asking questions this afternoon and sharing this time with us. We appreciate being here.
Chairman Stein, Chairman Glover, members of the council, we just want to say thank you for not just for your time, but your unwavering support, and we are going to put our pencils to paper, work hard, come back to you with a refined set of numbers, come back to the mayor first, obviously, but we'll be back to visit with you in the future. Please let us know if you have additional questions.
Thank you. We greatly appreciate your willingness to dialogue, and thank you to all the members of the board. Chairman Mays?
One final reminder is, I don't know if you said this or not, but we need to make sure that we say that there will be a public hearing on the budget on April 1st, along with the Budget and Finance Committee meeting that will follow that. So the public hearing will be at 5 o'clock, and it'll be followed by the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. So thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all for being here.